Welcome to another chapter of the Crown podcast. Today we have a very special guest who is going to share some incredible information with you that can help you along your own healing journey and self-discovery journey. Deborah Maloney-Marsden, thank you for joining us. I also want to add a disclaimer at the beginning of this one. And say, we are going to be speaking about emotions and mental health. And I just want you all to know that it's okay to not be okay. It's okay to feel, and that this is a very safe and gentle space for you. So enjoy the conversation and take from it what you feel is appropriate for you. And without any more of my introduction, welcome, Deborah.
Thank you, Steve. It's really nice to be here with you.
It's great to have you. I just mentioned, about feeling, and it's quite strange that we have to be told that it's okay to feel when it's something that we all do from the moment we are born, and we cry, we express an emotion. And I know for a long time in my life, I suppressed a lot of my feelings through shame and fear, fear of being judged. And this made opening up quite a challenging thing to do for me. And I later learned that it was my lack of understanding of emotional health that made me feel like an amateur. I can't get into certain conversations. I don't understand my own feelings. How can I speak about them? And this was based on misconceptions and not being informed. So I just want to know from you, to start off with, what are some of the common misconceptions about emotional and mental health?
I think that you just kind of named one of the main ones, which is that it's strong not to feel. It's strong to be in our heads, to not quiver, to not show how we're feeling inside. And it's even in the word mental health, because that's how we pin this originally. Do you remember? And I was like, well, actually, let's put emotional in there too, because mental health makes it sound like it's in the head. And it's not. A lot of the time it's a disconnection from our body and from the sensations of feeling in our body. So even in the very name mental health, it's already a giant misconception. Because if I fix my thinking, if I fix my mind, then I'm going to be okay. But we still haven't delved into what it is that is actually causing the feelings, right? And it's them that we struggle to sit with because we're never taught. Like you said, there's no education around emotional health. How do we process it? So there's those parts of it. And I think that there's so much misconception around what's appropriate and what's not in different settings. So we end up kind of splitting off from parts of ourselves, and that happens at school, right? It's like everything is fragmented in society. So from a very early age, we learn subjects independently of each other. And so this kind of shutdown starts happening inside. Oh, so I can be this person at school, and then this person at home, and then this person with granny and granddad, and then this person over here, and this person with my friends. There's no kind of cohesion. So it's like, and that is mirrored to us constantly. Society mirrors it back at work, at school, in social circles. It's like, they're the friends that I can be like this with, and they're the friends I can be like that. So all of this shutting down and splitting off is happening. And we're kind of saying, yeah, that's healthy and that's okay. But what happens inside us when we're doing that? I think that feels a really big part of this.
And I think, I mentioned at the top that you are a psychotherapist, and, again, just like the word mental health, people assume that means you work with people's minds, but one of your core, I guess the foundation of your work is whole human therapy.
Yeah.
And what does that look like to you? And what is that for someone who's never heard of that before?
Like, I mean, this isn't new either. It's like in the 70s, it was, people, it was breath work, it was deep work, it was body, it was mind, it was posture. But I guess for me, that regulation of our nervous system, it's physiological, it's happening in our body. And so we have this kind of this core in us which needs addressing, and that's physical, and it affects the mental state, it affects our thoughts. So if we see something out in the world that triggers an unconscious memory and it sends our nervous system into a hyper aroused state, okay, so we see just a flicker of light, it can be that small, just to kind of trigger something in us, but then it goes off into our thoughts, and then it's because of what's happening tomorrow, and it's because of this, and it's because of that, and it's because she said this and she said that. But actually all of that noise has stemmed from this action which has happened deep within our psyche. Okay, so we need to first of all understand how to regulate the body. What's the body doing? What's the breath doing? How are we sitting? What's happened to our shoulders? What's going on physically? And after that, it's around, what is it that triggers us? What is it from a deep down place that we are constantly trying to manage? What are these incidents that happen that have stayed knotted in our bodies that keep getting triggered? Yeah, so that's a very deep excavation almost of what it is that causes these different triggers to happen on relatively innocent interactions. But for me, it's past, present, future. It's the soul, it's the spirit, it's connection to others. That the relationship we have with ourselves is so intimate. Like, it's everything. Like, it's our whole inner world. Like, this is it. What's happening in here is informing us of what's happening out there. So really understanding the intimacy of that relationship is so important, and we do that in lots of different ways. So it might be that we do breath journeys, we might do visualizations, we might do exploration into some childhood stuff, and it's all done in a very kind of contained way in the container of therapy, so in that relationship. But yeah, there's a lot that happens within that space, because we are everything that we've been through, but we're also more than that too.
It's a beautiful way of looking at it, that we are multifaceted, and so these integrations of all the different parts of us are so important for cultivating healthier lifestyles. And so I then wonder, a lot of emphasis by default goes on physical health. You fall over as a child, you learn very quickly, hey, I need to step over the pavement when I'm running. And then more recently, with research and a lot of campaigning around mental health, you kind of know what signs to look for. And you have the DSM models which say, if you are, if you have low mood for this long and these are your symptoms, then it kind of helps you to understand what could be going wrong, what signs to look for. But with emotional health, I think that's a very tricky one, and it's not promoted as much. And so for someone who may be experiencing these fluctuations in their emotions, what are some of the signs to look for in declining emotional health?
I think that's the word, Steve. It's about declining, right? And it can be so subtle. For some of us, we might start doing more of things that make us feel better short term, worse long term, right? So it's like, it's looking for deviations in this center line. It's like, if we have these non-negotiable parts that we do, so we eat good food, right? We get out in nature, we walk, we connect with others. And so we have these kind of foundations of, these are the things that I know keep me in this place. Now, sometimes when we're not feeling great, so if something's happened, we stop doing these things when actually we need to just increase doing them. For some people, we start doing too much of something. So it's kind of like there's this happy place, which is quite fluid. But when we start doing more or less of things that we know are good for us or not good for us, I hope that makes sense, because that probably feels a bit confusing actually. But it's like it's the deviations to these patterns and where that then leads us. And the reason I'm saying more of, less of, is because some of us are more prone to collapse. So we're more prone to depressive states, and some of us are more prone to hyper states, anxious states, where we have more panic attacks, or the anxiety becomes so great we can't leave. And for some of us, we become too depressed to leave. So it's like, where is that place that we tend to fall into? And again, it's understanding what triggers us. And then this is that deeper work. We have these kind of belief structures that are sort of sitting deep within us. So I'm not good enough, right? I'm not as good as everyone else. So, or there is something wrong with me, or people leave me, or people don't like me, whatever these kind of really core, deep down beliefs are. It's like, what can happen when we're kind of falling into something is that we can have some very small events, but all with a slightly similar narrative, where we take the same message from them, that can happen over a protracted period of time. So it can be, last month somebody said no to this thing, and then I didn't get this job, and then I remember this happening, and then that happening. But when you put them all together, you have this path that's leading us down a collapse, right? And so it's like, how can we stay aware of this impact? And so what you were saying earlier is beautiful, because when we fall over, we get a bruise and it gets better. But when we have a little knock, what do? Do we do kind of that kind of positive bit of, yeah, no, but it's fine, I'll get another job, it'll be okay? Or do we sit there and say, do you know what, that hurt? That hurt a little bit, and I'm going to sit with that, and I'm going to talk to that part of me that's hurt and make that part feel better, and then pick myself up and carry on. But very often we brush over it. We don't see the bruise and we carry on. So when we get another bruise and then another bruise, suddenly we have a broken leg and we can't go on, because the pain is too much, because it's triggering that very deep wounding of, I'm not enough.
And do you find then that what happens is, for those who don't know or who cannot identify those signs, that it starts to just pile up, so one trauma and another trauma, and then it kind of all, you spoke to the stories we create and the assumptions that we make based on things we've been through before, then the trauma just becomes this merged mess where you cannot identify where it stems from, what are you even upset about, because it's a accumulation of a lot of things. And so do you find in your work that it's never just one thing?
Yeah. And it's not, right? Because it never is. Because we come with our experience. So it's like, what something looks like to you it's gonna look different to me. So my story around it is different. And I think that one of the things that is the most evident is people's lack of empathy to themselves about the small things, right? It's like we gloss over them. And so it's like that relationship where we think we're coming to therapy for one thing, but actually once we start unpacking it, there's like this whole kind of plethora of things that are sitting there that need to be processed and integrated. But when we don't look at them in that kind of whole picture perspective, we can't access empathy and self-compassion, because it's like, well, hang on a minute, that person just told me to move my car, so why am I suddenly feeling these massive feelings? There's something wrong with me, I'm an idiot. And then off we go into that kind of critical space, right? But actually, when we kind of sit back and say, yeah, but the reason that triggers you and what else has been happening, And it's so beautiful, like having that reflection that reflected back at you, like this is everything. And suddenly we can access more of that self-compassion.
I was going to say then, so how important is, empathy and self-compassion with regards to having a successful healing journey? And do you see that as part of your role and to help your clients cultivate the right space to be empathetic towards themselves?
I think that's the majority of what therapy is. It's like when we see somebody moved by something that we are sharing about ourselves, it's like, oh, there's emotion there, that feels something, that person is impacted by me. And it's as though seeing someone else's empathy, experiencing that, it teaches us how to be with ourselves inside. That if someone's kind to us, then we learn kindness. If someone feels us, then we learn to feel ourselves. I'm not saying it's easy, and it does take time. And a lot of the kind of the wrangles in therapy are around like, can we go back and can you see a different space in there? Can you feel something in there? But yes, self-compassion and empathy, it's hard to cultivate. But I really think it's one of the main tenets of yeah.
You think it makes it harder because we are in a society that thrives off negativity, comparison, and kind of getting things done quickly? Do you think it makes it harder to be compassionate with oneself because it always feels like we're behind, or it's taking too long to heal, or this person's not, reacting the way that I am, and they've gone through the same thing that I have? Do you think that we've been nurtured to be less empathetic with ourselves?
Like so much, it's untrue, and even when you asked me earlier, what are the main things that you look for when someone's falling down? It's like, I wonder how so many of us stay standing up in this space. It's like we are constantly being bombarded with stress, with pain, with trauma, with all of the things in our daily lives. I mean, I know that you don't watch the news anymore, neither do I.
It still finds its way to me somehow.
It still does. And when it does, it's still traumatic. And I'm not watching it on the TV, but I'm hearing stories and I feel it. It's like, how could we possibly sit in this very open emotional state with everything that's being thrown at us without being impacted? And but we're living in a corporate structure, where it's all about X, Y, and Z and these kind of parameters around success. So there is no space for self-compassion, really, because you need to make money and you need to be successful by making money. And the person that you're working for needs you to show up and make money. And so we can kind of be quite nice around the edges, but actually when needed, like, you need to make money and you're replaceable. So these kind of structures just really don't fit in with this idea that we can kind of really, really deeply look after ourselves.
Yeah, and I was just going to add to that, and we haven't even begun talking about our own individual traumas. This is just the platform that we stand on in the world. And I wanted to, go a bit deeper into the things that we consume, the information that finds its way to us, or I've spoken about for many years, that, we pick up habits. If you hang around people who swear, you're more likely to swear. If you read a lot of self-help books, that will become your language. You will start to speak like self-help books. It's literally what happened to me. So we know how what we consume and what we absorb can impact our mental state.
But
what does that look like and feel like emotionally? So let's say the news, let's say Because believe it or not, a lot of good things happening in the world. You wouldn't believe it
Oh,
by the
no,
news,
yeah.
but just what happens when what does our body do? What's that nervous system's response?
So this is how we learn about our own individual adaptations, right? So how do we react to traumatic events? Where did we learn this reaction? So for some people, they might watch the news and it might make them cry, which is probably one of the healthiest responses, right? Because it's, here we go, something very painful is happening. I'm feeling it in my body. So I'm feeling my heart break. I'm feeling this pain, and now I'm releasing that by crying. Okay. All right. So there's something of a cycle that's being completed in that example. But if you're sitting there watching the news, a lot of the time our bodies and our minds are completely separate. Okay, so it might be that we hear something, it creates an anxiety, so a shot of adrenaline in the body, our heart pace quickens, so we're moving ourselves into hyperarousal. Yeah, so we're kind of, the body is becoming stimulated, the chest and the breath is becoming shortened. Because our feeling center is further down in our bodies, we often pull the breath up to the chest area, which isn't really ideal for breathing. And so we're up here taking short breaths. And then eventually we kind of push ourselves up into our heads. So we kind of dissociate or detach from what's happening.
I've had some conversations recently about the languaging surrounding mental health, and it's very young in terms of the research is not very old, and so we're still learning a lot. And while the information has been useful for people understanding what they may be experiencing, in a way, when we're talking about emotions, it's not a head thing. So it doesn't really matter how knowledgeable you are. It's a feeling thing, right?
Yeah. And what's the reason that we don't feel, right? And it's because there are things there, and it may be trauma, it may be wounding. So like, you have trauma, which is, a buildup of overwhelming events that you just cannot process. And then you have wounding, which is a lot of repeated pain that happens, and look, there's nuance to this language as well. So people use it differently, but it's like something has happened in the body, and there are these kind of, I like to think of them as little vortexes of energy that get stuck in different places, and we kind of leave them in different places in the body. And so when we breathe deeply from the belly, we do run the risk of bumping into these vortexes. When we feel into our body and we feel pain, we run the risk of those painful memories starting to move through us. And that's why a lot of people have anxiety, because anxiety is top half of the body, right? It's the movement upwards and away from. And that's how I experience it. That's how I kind of see it. That's what I witness. So the further away we get from these parts of ourselves, the safer we feel. But actually we're very unsafe because we're not in our bodies. We're not able to feel. A lot of the time our intuition is a little bit off because we're not able to access our gut. So it's like it's the breath is so important in this. It really is. But yeah, that cut off happens quite vividly and over quite a lot of time for a lot of people.
You think it starts quite early in our lives? Like you mentioned earlier about school, and we only know what we know. And so the programming can start extremely young.
Yeah.
Even as far as, my parenting has changed over years, and compared to maybe when I was growing up, if you hurt yourself, especially as a boy, you're told to just be strong, and you didn't break your leg, it's okay.
Yeah.
It's going to be fine. And so you've got this concept in your mind of what strong is, where actually, as I've gotten older and I've thought about how I've parented my children, and just many, many young people I've spoken to over the years, and that actually the strongest thing you can do is feel.
Yeah.
Because it takes courage. It takes like you said, you're going to be journeying inside yourself and
Yeah,
you're going to bump into things that you don't want to see. But
yeah,
well done you for having the courage to, face those things.
yeah.
And so how important is it for us to, I guess, unlearn some of the things we've learned from young and relearn some of more healthier ways?
Oh, it's like everything. I mean, this is like when you think about the neuro pathways, right? It's like we literally need to learn new pathways, new messaging from kind of, I mean, God, some of the things that, I think that were said to children, that were said to me, about the feeling of emotions and the expression of emotions was so shamed. I mean, it's like I remember words like hysterical used for crying and pathetic and all of these really negative words around it. And, or attention seeking, when I think now we know it's connection seeking. It's like all of these things that were thrown at us. And so our kind of parents that live in our heads are telling us these things still when we're in our 20s or in our 30s, unless we consciously create new parents in our heads. Like we have to create new voices that tell us new things about these things. Otherwise, we're just going to be saying the same things to ourselves. So we can do all of the work, like we can read the books, but unless that narrative and those conversations internally change, we're still going to be shaming ourselves for feeling. We're still going to be saying you can't be vulnerable here. It's like this isn't, you need to be X, you need to be Y. So I think it is important. We can do it in lots of different ways. Like therapy isn't the only way. It's like, what can we say to ourselves instead of this? What would be a more gentle way? We can write a list of what our inner parents say to us on one side, and then we can kind of try and think of a list on the other side which is gentle and soft, or at least a little bit more compassionate, right?
Then we grow up and by that time we may have this real deep programming of what strong looks like or what weak looks like, what's acceptable, what's not. And I then wonder, because I experience it, myself when I say things or if I write something, someone's going to say easier said than done. Someone's going to say it despite my own journey of going through it. But essentially, we've been taught for a very long time that vulnerability is a weakness, or it will stop you from getting a job or having a good relationship. It will make you look unstable. But it's the complete opposite. It's essential for healing, essential for growth.
It's also essential for connection.
Mm.
And it's essential for true intimate relationships. We have to learn how to be vulnerable with each other, because it's in relationship that we heal. So if we can't access that deep vulnerability with another person, then relational trauma cannot heal itself. We can't. It's so important because it's the truth of who we are.
And in being vulnerable, some people only feel comfortable doing that in their safe space or in their home or when everyone's gone to sleep. And then we develop these coping mechanisms. And
Yeah.
so it's a word that has been used quite a lot. And I guess just regular people who are not clinicians use the word coping mechanisms quite a lot. But, some of these coping mechanisms, although they're unhealthy, they keep people alive.
They work.
They work.
Yeah.
They're temporary, but they're
Yeah.
sometimes when you're on a long waiting list, that's all you have.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
if someone's so deeply embedded into their way of coping, when they come to have therapy and something different is suggested, is that, I guess it's taking them out of their comfort zone. Is that a positive thing? Or do you try to
Yeah.
incorporate new coping mechanisms
Yeah.
alongside what they've been doing
Yeah.
for their whole
Absolutely.
life?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, remember, like all of our coping mechanisms are, they're so clever. Our little children, our little bodies, learn how to do these things to keep ourselves safe. to maximize the care and the love that we received, and it's like, yes, they stop working, they start breaking down and they become harmful, but we need to respect these structures. But what we need to do is we need to see them, and then we need to see what it is they're protecting us from, right? So it's not even about learning new ones, it's about having a deeper understanding of what these are and why they're there.
Already, yeah.
You see what I mean? And it's kind of from there we can go, okay, so, and then we can learn more about where they in our bodies, where they are in our psyches, and what happens if we do X, Y, and Z. And it could be, I mean, for me, so much of the anchoring of helping us feel better is to do with the breath. It's like, that's our anchor. It's there all the time. And in good times, we need to be fostering a really, really beautiful, intimate, strong relationship with our breath. So when it comes to these times when we're shaken, we can really lean into the things that we've learned about how we need to be breathing. So it's like, these are the kind of inner structures that get put in place quite subtly through early therapy practice. So when things kind of, when old structures start to break down a little bit and new ones start to form, or we just don't need the same protection, there is this core of, I know I'm okay, or I know I can access my breath, or I know the ground is underneath me and I can really feel that support from the earth. It's like these things kind of subtly get introduced very, very, very early on.
I think typically what happens though is people are so distracted by the outside world and the environment that they don't see the environment, and so they are the demands on life, the pressures on their schedules, and having to go to work or school or college or uni, and there tends to be no space for the individual self. And so you said about fostering intimacy, with your breath or just yourself as on a whole. This means, having a relationship with yourself, and with any relationship, it takes time and investment. And so, we're going to touch on the word priority, making ourselves a priority, making our emotional well-being a priority. How important is that for someone who says, I want to feel better, or I want to heal, or I don't want to feel this bad? How important is the prioritizing part?
Well, I'm going to say, I think it's everything, right? It's like, it's the foundation. And it doesn't need to be huge. It can be, a few minutes in the morning of just sitting with your feet on the side of the bed and feeling your breath. It can be really, really simple tracking through the day. No matter how busy we get, 12 o'clock every day, I'm going to check in with my breath and feel my feet. It's like these really small things. And I'm not saying that they alone change anything, but they're a beginning of like, I care enough just to stop and be with myself. But the world, it takes us away, but it's not us that's unhealthy. It's the world, right? It's like we're trying to fit ourselves and our nervous systems around a world that is broken, and there are beautiful things happening, but the system that we have to keep partaking in isn't healthy. It pulls people out of shape. It's like, working in the way that people work, with all of the distractions, the Instagrams, the kind of the flashings, everything coming in, coming out. It's like this, it's hard to find peace.
Because everything's outside, it's all visual, it's the advertising, it's the, hey, do you have a bad back? Well, you're not doing something correctly, but if you take this or try this, then it'll be fixed. Or, are you tired of being in debt? It's just like they're playing on the emotions. And so now you're pulling up some of these feelings, but there's nowhere for them to go other than the mind. And now you can think about how bad you feel because everything's kind of pulled you in that direction. And so I will ask you then, how important is it for us to create our own systems?
The thing that we lack the most of externally is proper attention. Okay, so if if we started by paying attention, like paying attention to what's happening inside, you know, and then we start paying attention to really the people in our lives more clearly, and then the people in our neighborhood, and then the people in the wider community. And actually, Steve, maybe someday there will be a new community, like a new system, if that's, you know, everyone pays attention to what's happening on a subtle level. You know, like what is it that we find difficult, that we need to cut back on? What is it that actually hurts us and offends us, that we need to really recognize? Where are we doing too much that's really affecting our nervous system and increasing our anxiety? Where are we doing too little? You know, it's like, where do we need to actually step up and really start being more active? And, you know, I just think maybe it starts with something to do with the attention that we pay to our body, to our mind, to our breath, you know, just listening to the silence around us, or just listening and being in that space, because listening is the best way just to drop into presence.
And so, yeah, with the lack of attention, you know, it's probably connected to distractions, you know. And so a lot of people, all of us, you know, when we go through painful things, if there's not a solution or a quick fix, we want to do something, take our minds off it, we say, right? And so that distraction may not be harmful, but the longer you are in it, the further away you're getting from what you were feeling. And so again, back to that relationship with self, if you don't know the signs because you're not with you enough, you know, in a relationship, you know what annoys your partner because of how much time you spend with them. But similarly, the same happens with you. If you are spending a lot of time with yourself, or just like you said, a small portion of your day where you're just about what's happening with my body right now, you will learn a lot, you know. And then from that, you may learn who you should be around, who you shouldn't be around, who makes me feel a certain way, and you can start to shape your system accordingly. And so it's not an easy thing for people to do, to admit that, you know, I don't feel good, I feel off, I feel unbalanced. And so that's a major hurdle for a lot of people. Maybe someone listening to this, how important is it to seek help, and what kind of advice would you give to people who maybe feel a bit mentally and emotionally unstable, and how can they overcome the stigma that's associated with therapy and reaching out for help?
Because I mean, the thing is the very, like, the essence of what we're saying is it's so important to be vulnerable. And that's what we kind of need in order to say that something isn't right. You know, so it's like we're kind of going to the very core of what's hard just to get a little bit of help. And so for me, it's always around the most trusted person in your life. You know, it's like, it's being able to share with somebody. And that's the first step, right? It's like, who is the most trusted person that you can kind of say, look, I'm not feeling great, I'm feeling a bit wobbly. You know, it's a softer place to start. You know, and for people that don't have that, then we are looking at going to a GP and starting on that road. And there are some great GPs out there that will be able to direct you. And then for people in crisis, you've got helplines, right, where people can phone in and then be directed. So you kind of got different stages. But if you're in that stage where something isn't right, you've been doing the same thing over and over again, and you're feeling stuck, you're feeling like something just isn't moving, you know, then it's really important to share that with somebody.
And let's say, you know, in the second part to what you said, someone's, I don't have a support network, I'm tired of, you know, GPs and the waiting list and the, you know, and they say they end up in your inbox, right? Say, hey, you know, I heard the podcast and I'm really interested in what you do, and I've never looked at it from that perspective holistically. What's the starting point?
The first thing that I guess, you know, people send a variety of different emails, and it's always so beautiful to hear somebody, connect with them. A lot of people don't put much information in, some people put a lot in, you know, and it's all about whatever feels right for the person at the time, right? So and then that's received, and then there's this kind of process of setting something up, having a first dialogue. And I think every therapist has a slightly different way of doing things, you know, but for me, I always like to connect quite quickly on Zoom, and just have that first 20 minutes to, you know, for them to see how I feel, but also for me to assess their needs as well. So there's something that happens in there. And then we take it from there. You know, is it something that needs to be a weekly therapy piece, or is it something that can be less frequent? And that kind of depends. But it's about getting into relationship with somebody to help support them as quickly as possible. So if I don't have availability, then there's a referral process. Like a lot of us in private practice have a lot of people that we can refer to depending on the client. But yeah, and it depends what's needed. Some people need short term, some people want to go long and deep, you know, and some people, they, you know, they need a little bit and then a break and then a little bit. So it really is different for everybody.
Yeah,
it really is. Yeah.
and that should encourage people, because as much as we look for comfort in, or we find comfort in knowing that someone else is going through what we are, and that we're not alone with it, we also experience things so differently. And that, I think that's encouraging, because it shows how unique we really are. So to someone who doesn't feel significant, even in their difficulty, there's uniqueness, you know. And and so yeah, I think that's quite fascinating. And I want to touch a bit more on the relationship between trauma and the body. You mentioned breathing. Are there other things that you recommend that people do to get in touch with their bodies?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the body piece is so important, but you know, there are things that we do all the time, like, you know, there are things that are very easy to access, like yoga, you know, like I think yoga is a good start, because it kind of really does put us in that mindful connection with the body, and it can be slow and it can be fast. So that's a nice kind of starting point. It's like I could say to you, you know, grounding is so important for all of us. And then I also am aware that for some people with really acute trauma in certain parts of the body, grounding would be overwhelming. And so it's one of those things where you need to be sitting in a room with someone before you can say, have you tried this? What does this feel like? You know, but there are great things that are around, like tapping, TRE, which is trauma release exercises, and there are certified practitioners, and they're amazing. Bioenergetics, which I use in my practice, which is sort of different moves and holding different moves to create charge and resistance in the body. So those things are available, you know, things like Tai Chi, things, you know, all of these things where we're moving between slow and fast movements, are really nice. But everyone is so different. Yeah. And what you said at the beginning, like what works now for you wouldn't have worked 10 years ago. And what worked 10 years ago, you're like, I'm not going to do that now. You know, it's so, we change and we need different things all the time. And I think that's the thing with a lot of sort of mental health advice, is that it is one thing fits all.
And so that's why it's even more so important to really focus in on building the relationship with self.
Yeah.
Because the better you know yourself, or you can learn about yourself, then before you even see a therapist, you can kind of have an understanding of, okay, this hasn't worked for me, this does work for me.
Yeah.
I'm willing to give this a try, but I have to stay away from that, because you've
Yeah.
You know you.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know you better than the therapist knows you. And so,
Absolutely.
again, back to that point of prioritizing your emotional, your mental, your physical health. They're all important in this great puzzle of life. Okay, so on that note, I know my audience very well, and I typically conclude with a question like this. And you can answer it from any of the strands that you've spoken about, or all of the strands.
Okay.
But there's this person who has been going through a really difficult time. They feel a bit out of control. They feel as though their feelings don't matter. Maybe it started to manifest itself in their body, and they've started to have some physical deterioration, and they have a lack of clarity mentally. Maybe they want to give up, run out of hope, and maybe it's not as strong as they once, thought they were, or they once were. What would your advice be to someone who's feeling that way?
I know that place. Like, I know that place well. And what I needed to know then was that it's a process. And sometimes we need to reach a rock bottom to really feel the pain of being all the way down there. And we shift. It is temporary, and that knowing that we can recover from the deepest pain and the deepest wounding, that we can. And that comes from a place of, I know that place, and I know that we get to walk out of it, if we can trust in something slightly bigger, something slightly more than what we see right in front of us. Like, we're always being carried. And sometimes we need to kind of just lean into that deeper part and that deeper knowing within us.
That's beautiful. Thank you very, very much. A lot of amazing things shared today. I mean, we are definitely going to have to do another chapter at a later date, because there's a lot to unpack. And the whole purpose of this podcast is to give people information that's palatable, easy to absorb, and actionable. And I think we've done that today. So I just want to thank you for sharing all that you have, taking the time out to be of service to people. A lot to think about, a lot to consider. It's not just your mind, it's a whole pie. But thank you so much for your time. To everyone listening, if you want more information on my guest, it will be in the description. Until next time, stay blessed, and I wish you better days.